So before I begin, I want to note that we actually had silence and silent prayer. How about that? I always thought that it's funny that in all Reformed services we say, let's take some time for silent prayer, and then there isn't silence. So that was a really nice choice, and I hope we can do that occasionally. I think the beauty of it is that the prayer becomes maybe what we listen to, whether it be our emotions, our thoughts. That high pitch over there, I definitely noticed that. And we would hear various noises outside, but everybody's preparing for the game, so there's not many people out there. But that was a really, really nice choice. So this weekend, our nation celebrates the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. For 2.5 centuries, Americans have told a story about freedom. It's a foundational ideal that has shaped our nation more than any other. We celebrate those who pursued liberty, resisted tyranny, and dreamed of a society in which people could govern themselves. As we celebrate this anniversary, we also retell stories that shaped our understanding of America as children. We picture George Washington crossing the Delaware on a freezing Christmas night. We hear Patrick Henry's cry, "Give me liberty or give me death." We remember the Declaration's assertion that all people are created equal and endowed with the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These stories have become part of our national identity. They remind us that the promise of liberty has inspired generations of Americans. It's a beautiful story. It's also an incomplete one. The Declaration proclaimed that all people are created equal, yet many of those living on this continent at that time were excluded from its promise. Enslaved Africans remained in bondage. Women possessed few legal rights. Native peoples were beginning to pay an enormous price for the nation's expansion. The American story also teaches us something else. Freedom is precious. It's always been imperfect. Every generation has had to ask not only what freedom means, but who shares in it. And Judaism has wrestled with this idea for thousands of years. When most people think about Passover, they think about freedom. We tell the story of enslaved people leaving Egypt and becoming free people. At the same time, the rabbis of the Talmud spend little time discussing freedom as an abstract ideal. If we look at the Mishnah, there are 3 words that talk about freedom when they're talking about the laws of Passover. 3 words. Yet we've made it such a central part of the story of the Passover story for us here in America. They don't ask what is freedom, but what do free people owe one another? That's the important expansion on that in the Talmud. Not what is freedom, but what do free people owe one another? In true rabbinic form, the rabbis begin their discussion with an unanswerable question. How can we have free will if God has power over us? We can choose. Without that ability, reward and punishment would make little sense. We could not be praised for acts of kindness or held accountable for acts of cruelty if every decision had already been made for us. Then we move on to the contradiction. If God is involved in the world and has ultimate power over it, how free are we really? We still haven't solved that one. Rather than offering an easy answer, the rabbis preserve the tension. Rabbi Akiva expresses it in a single sentence. Everything is foreseen, yet freedom of choice is given. Everything is foreseen, yet freedom of choice is given. God knows, yet we choose. And the contradiction ultimately is left unresolved. And that may feel frustrating and feel unsatisfactory, but it reflects an important truth about life. Not every profound question has a tidy answer. Some realities are too large for simple explanations. Nonetheless, as they would, I should tell you, we're going to have a pretty serious load of Jewish philosophy coming at you right now. So a little bit of a warning. Nonetheless, as they would, medieval Jewish thinkers tried to solve this puzzle. Their way out of the bind was to limit freedom, whether it be God's or ours. That's still the way that Jewish theologians are working on this, is either to limit our power or God's power, essentially. It became a big question post-Holocaust, obviously, right? Why didn't God stop it? Ultimately, the theologians came up with the same as the medievals. So, completely lost my place. Some argue that God voluntarily limits divine knowledge to preserve human freedom. Others suggested that our freedom is more limited than we imagine. Maimonides took another path. He argued that the contradiction exists only because human beings cannot understand the way that God knows the world, sort of our current fundamentalist idea. What appears impossible from our perspective is no contradiction from God's perspective. Whether or not we find these answers convincing, they remind us that Judaism has always taken freedom seriously. Freedom demands humility because we do not fully understand ourselves, one another, or God. That's, I think, one of the most beautiful parts of rabbinic thought, rabbinic epistemology, to give a fancy word, their theory of knowledge. We don't have knowledge with a capital K. We don't have truth with a capital T. We can think about it our whole lives for eternity. Humans aren't going to get it because that only is in the realm of that which is beyond us, whether you call it God or something else. It's just a gorgeous idea and just built into essential human humility. There was even one Hasidic teacher who brushed the chess pieces off the table and challenged the entire discussion. The Ishbitzer Rebbe argued that everything unfolds according to God's will. Human freedom lies not in controlling events, rather in discerning how we should respond to them. His ideas were really controversial. It comes a little close to Calvinism, essentially that everything's determined. According to historians, his teacher, the Ger Rebbe, likely kicked him to the curb and threw him out of Ger Hasidut, and he started his own little group, which was a tiny little group. So these guys, it also forces us to ask whether freedom is getting our way, or aligning ourselves with something greater than ourselves. I like that piece of the thought, that ultimately our job is simply to align ourselves. That's a nice idea that comes out of this assumption that God's will is determinative. Well, then we just align ourselves with God's will. But if we take that more broadly, of aligning ourselves, I think that's a really gorgeous idea. Most modern people instinctively think of freedom as independence. Freedom means that no one tells me what to do. Sort of a fourth grade attitude to freedom. Freedom means removing obstacles so that I can pursue my own goals, and Judaism goes further. The 20th century Jewish philosopher Emanuel Levinas offers a vision of freedom that speaks to both our Jewish tradition and our American moment. And he's writing in France in a post-Holocaust world. We should keep that in mind as well. He argues that freedom is not something we possess, it's something that we create together. Freedom isn't something that we possess, but it's something that we create together. Recognizing our shared responsibility inspires us to fight for justice and support mutual care in our community. According to Levinas, we become truly free when we recognize our responsibility to others. Freedom involves obligation to care for and uplift those around us. For Levinas, it's not about enjoying freedom, it's about freeing one another. So let's now return to the book of Exodus after some philosophy and my digressions, and let's hope that it takes on some new meaning. So again and again, the Torah reminds us, you were strangers in the land of Egypt. The point is not that we escaped oppression. The point is that our experience creates an obligation. Because we know what it feels to be vulnerable, we're commanded to protect the vulnerable. Because we remember slavery, we're called to oppose injustice. Freedom is never only about ourselves. So as America marks 250 years, perhaps that is the question worth asking, not am I free, but how does my freedom help someone else become freer? That question reaches into every neighborhood, every workplace, every family, and every congregation. It asks whether our freedom makes room for another person's freedom. Maybe this is how we should hear those familiar stories of our nation's founding 250 years later. Washington crossing the Delaware is not only a story about courage in the face of overwhelming odds. Patrick Henry's call for liberty is not only a declaration of personal independence. The promise of the Declaration of Independence is not only that we may govern ourselves. At their best, these stories invite us to build a nation in which freedom is continually widened and shared. Their highest purpose is fulfilled not when liberty is claimed for ourselves alone, but when it becomes a blessing that extends to our neighbors. And that's the deepest lesson Judaism offers to this Independence Day. Freedom is not only a gift to celebrate, it's a responsibility to fulfill. We honor the blessings of liberty not only by defending our own rights, but also by helping to create a society in which we all have rights. And that's the kind of freedom that's worth celebrating. Shabbat Shalom.